All right, well, 7:02. I think we'll get started and people can kind of arrive when they find the link if they're running late. But good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's program, Creating a Family Frame: How to Set the Boundaries Your Child Needs to Thrive. My name is Emily Larkin. I am the Thriving Youth Program Director at the Community Fund of Darien, and I coordinate the efforts of the Thriving Youth Task Force and our brand new Drug-Free Communities grant aimed at addressing teen alcohol and marijuana use in Darien. In partnership with the Darien Public Schools, last year, TYTF surveyed over 2,000 Darien 7th through 12th grade students about their mental health, stress, and substance use patterns. A key finding this year were the variables that predicted substance-free students. The top three were: first, parents monitored their teens' whereabouts; second, that parents communicated clear family rules, family frame, why we're here tonight, and strong disapproval of substance use; and third, parents maintained open lines of communication with their teen. Kids reported that they felt comfortable talking to their parents about drugs, alcohol, and other sensitive issues. While these concepts might resonate with you as a parent, they can be difficult to put into practice. And we are so pleased to welcome two local experts who will present tonight and help us learn how to create a family frame of expectations and rules in order to keep your children physically and emotionally safe while respecting their need for independence. Georgette Harrison is a licensed professional counselor with the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut, where she serves as the Director of Clinical and Community Partnerships. Georgette also serves as the co-chair of the Thriving Youth Task Force. And we are also delighted to welcome Tracy Masella, a licensed clinical social worker in affiliation with Silver Hill Hospital. So to start this evening, Georgette and Tracy will each share some remarks, and then we'll have an audience Q&A. So please submit your questions for Georgette and Tracy using the direct chat button at the bottom of your screen. All questions will be asked anonymously. And a final housekeeping note: this event will be recorded and the slides and recording will be made available on the TYTF resource page. We'll send all of this information in an email to everyone who registered tomorrow. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Georgette and pull up the slides for tonight.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone to tonight's workshop. And we are really hoping that it'll be a workshop more so than a presentation, where each family will be able to walk away with something that works for them in particular, because each family is going to be different in terms of what their family frame might look like. So please don't hesitate to submit your questions, and Emily will read them out for Tracy and I to work through with you. So we wanted to start out the evening by really thinking about your child's developmental needs. And the workshop tonight is really for kids of all ages, particularly elementary, middle, and high school. You know, we often talk about because we wanted to include a conversation about, substance use and how to set that family frame within that context. And oftentimes the elementary age children are sort of forgotten in that conversation, this idea that somehow, they're too young to be ready for that conversation, or how do you even talk to an elementary school age child about that conversation? And so we really wanted to go back to, this idea of really thinking about your child's developmental needs. And the reality is that regardless of their age, there are two primary needs that your child has. One is a need for nurturing or caretaking from, from you, their parent, from the people around them, from teachers, any significant people in their life. The other need that they have that sometimes can feel like is in conflict with the need for caretaking and nurturing is the need for exploration. That is something that is just a drive within them, that they need to go out into the world and explore and try new things. All other tasks of childhood are really completed in the context with, within sort of that background of those developmental imperatives. And so how those needs are expressed, right? How your child may come to you or may come to peers or may come to important people in their life for nurturing, and how they go out and explore, they're expressed differently at each stage of development. The way that they do it when they're 12 is very different than the way that they do it when they're 16 is very different from when they're 20. But really the underlying need is exactly the same. It's either nurturing or exploration. And how you respond as a parent really depends on you as a parent figuring out what is the need that your child is expressing, their developmental level, which may or may not always be their age, and what is your ultimate goal? What are you hoping to accomplish as a family? Next slide. So this is a graphic that gets used a lot in a program called Circle of Security, which is really designed for much younger kids than elementary age. But again, I like this graphic even for elementary age, middle school, and high school, because again, the ways that maybe kids express these things are different, but their needs are exactly the same. So in Circle of Security, they talk about, you being your child's hands, and that there's a circle in which children sort of are constantly going, out of the circle. And when they go out of the circle, what they're doing is they're going out and exploring. They're fulfilling that developmental need to explore. And what they need when they're going out and exploring is they need you to watch over them. They need you to delight in their accomplishments. They need you to help them because they're trying out new tasks. And they need you to enjoy their exploration with them. When they're out in the circle and they're coming back in, right? They're coming back to you, their secure base, because this is based on attachment theory. What they're hoping that they'll get from you during to try to fulfill this caregiving need is they need protection. They need you to comfort them. They need you to delight in them when they come back to you. And they need you to what's called organizing their feelings, right? They need you to be able to help them understand their feelings. They need someone to help manage their feelings for them, because especially, in the period of adolescence, they're all about their feelings. Their feelings are something that, they're both conflicting feelings. They're feelings that they feel very intensely, probably more so than any other stage in their life, other than potentially toddlerhood. But their feelings are being felt in very intense ways. And your job as the hands for your child is that you need to be both that secure base and their safe haven. That secure base so that they can go out and explore, knowing that you'll still be there and that you'll contain them, you'll watch over them, and their safe haven so that when they come back in, you can help protect them, comfort them, delight in them, and organize their feelings. Next slide. And so when we think about the family frame, we're really talking about boundaries and limits and expectations, right? Now, boundaries and limits they're not meant to limit your child's exploration. They're not meant to limit your teen's exploration at all. If anything, they're meant to help your child explore safely. How do I help? The idea of setting a family frame is about thinking about how do I help my child go out into the world and explore safely at a time when maybe cognitively they're not necessarily making the best decisions, right? Because they shouldn't, right? They're young kids or they're teenagers. And in Circle of Security, they talk about the hands or you always having to be bigger, stronger, wiser, kind. You have to be bigger, stronger, and wiser in the sense that, you know, you have experienced what they have experienced, maybe not exactly the same, but there are times when they might want to do something and you have to say, that's not safe. I understand that this is what you want to do, but that's not safe. That is the part of being bigger, stronger, and wiser. We can't, as parents, just be kind to our kids. And especially as they're going out and exploring and getting older, it almost feels like in order to maintain a relationship with our teenagers, we have to sort of let go a little bit of the bigger, stronger, wiser part so that what they can come and talk to us. That's actually, again, the containment, the limits, the boundaries, they still need to be there so that teens can feel contained. They just get expressed differently. Okay? And whenever possible, you follow your child's need, and whenever necessary, you take charge. And that there are times when, in order for your child to explore safely, is when you need to know when to take charge, to keep your child safe. Next slide. So what does this look like in reality? In every family is going to be different. You might want to think about it in terms of a division of responsibilities within the family. It is the child's job developmentally to explore and test the limits. They want to know how far they can go and how far is it safe to go. It is our job as the adult, right, the bigger, stronger, wiser, kind adult, is to establish those boundaries and limits and enforce them when needed so that they can go out and explore safely. Now, it is developmentally appropriate for your elementary school child, for your teen, for your high schooler to protest, to cry, to try to negotiate those limits. And there are times when, especially as they get older, you start to second guess yourself about whether, you know, is this the hill that I want to die on? Is this the rule that I want to set? You know, am I being too harsh? It seems like every other parent doesn't have that same boundary. But just because your child is protesting or trying to negotiate, it doesn't necessarily mean that the boundary is inappropriate, right? It just means that it is their job to protest it. And it's our job to be wiser and to think about, am I establishing this boundary because this is an issue of safety? Or am I establishing this boundary because, you know, I already said it, I established it, and I feel like I don't want to back up, right? It's also appropriate for us to struggle when we see our kids reacting in that way, right? When they feel angry or sad or frustrated at us, it's normal for us to question ourselves as parents. But that struggle, our own struggle, should not be should not be the reason that we take away a boundary or a limit. Next slide. So again, this is something that you can do with teens, and Tracy will talk more about, you know, talking with teens, but especially with elementary school age, there is a lot of opportunities during these, you know, when you're establishing these boundaries, to really start to form a collaborative relationship. Again, you always have to be the bigger, stronger, wiser kind, but it doesn't mean that you don't get input. It doesn't mean that you don't try to be collaborative about it, because the other part of it is that you're teaching your child really important skills like collaboration and compromising, but also because they need you to be able to regulate their feelings. So with elementary school aged, what you can do when you're trying to collaborate is say, like, I know you really want to do X, right? But I'm worried about this, right? I'm worried about Y, and it's my job to keep you safe. What solution can we come up with? And try to come up with something that both sort of honors that developmental imperative that kids have to go out and explore and want to do the things that their peers are doing and things that seem fun. And at the same time, honor the fact that your primary responsibility, other than, putting a roof over their head and feeding them and nurturing them, is to keep them safe. Now, our ultimate goal with collaboration is also co-regulation, right? What does that mean? That means that I am here for you even when you are angry with me, even when you have every right to be angry, because I can't change a boundary for you because it's an issue of safety. And allowing that space for your child to have that open communication with you, to tell you how angry they are with you at times, and that you can tolerate it. You are bigger and stronger, and you can take their anger and their frustration, and that it won't ruin your relationship with them just because they're angry with you. But it also doesn't mean that you'll necessarily take away the boundary. That's co-regulation. Now, there's been a lot of articles and a lot on social media on peaceful or gentle parenting, which has been great in terms of parents taking that sort of style of parenting more. There's often a misconception about peaceful or gentle parenting, though, and that is that if you're doing peaceful or gentle parenting right, your child doesn't get upset. And that's actually not what peaceful or gentle parenting is about. Peaceful or gentle parenting has to do with how we act towards our children, not how our children react to our boundaries and limits. It's about us being able to peacefully establish a boundary and enforce it without losing our tempers, and being peaceful when our children are angry with us because of something that we've had to do to keep them safe. So just again, because your child is upset with you doesn't mean that you're not practicing peaceful parenting or gentle parenting. In fact, you are, if you're able to sort of regulate your own emotions while you're enforcing the limit. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Georgette. That is, I know that you said that is, that information is primarily for elementary, middle school, but so much of that language is completely appropriate for our teens as well. It might look a little different, but really the concepts that you presented are exactly the same as we carry out throughout our kids' teens and even into young adult years. So I wanted to put a plug in for learning emotional language and learning to be able to speak in an emotional language and be able to identify what somebody might be feeling. We don't often in families talk about what we're feeling. We usually act out what we're feeling, and often we're sending the wrong message. Emotions are super important. They give us a lot of information that we should pay attention to about both ourselves, and they also communicate with others what we might need, what we might want. And they motivate and organize us on a very primitive level. Our emotions are hardwired into our system. They come from our very primitive brain, that amygdala that is always, always, always working. And from the time that we are toddlers up until the time that we pass away, our amygdala does exactly the same thing. It's fully functioning by the time kids are toddlers. And so it's not unusual that teens, when they are faced with highly emotional decisions, will rely on the amygdala as opposed to their thinking brain, which isn't fully formed until the age of 25. So learning how to recognize, observe, and identify both our own emotions and those of our family members is super important in this idea of co-regulating. So if I know what I'm feeling, I can manage that while holding on to what my child is feeling and help him or her to manage that. If we don't know what the other person is feeling, or even worse, if we don't know what we're feeling, it's really hard to manage that because we react differently when we're sad to when we're angry. But if we're not communicating the right message because we're not in touch with what we're feeling, we might be sad or afraid, and what comes out is anger. Okay, so co-regulation. When your child, or anyone in your family, but since we're talking about our kids, we'll focus on the kids. When your kid comes to you and they are what we call emotionally aroused, right? So they're feeling all sorts of feels. They want something, they're talking, they're coming at you, and the level of intensity is rising, right? What they're looking for from you, first and foremost, is some validation that what they are feeling makes sense to you. That's the first job that we have when our kid comes to us in this emotionally aroused state, okay? Now, what do most of us do when our kid comes to us and they are emotionally aroused? We put on our super mom or dad cape, we tie it up, and we say, there's a problem, and darn it, I'm gonna solve it, right? We go right into problem solving mode. Who's involved? What do you need? Who should I call? Did you send an email? We go right into problem solving mode, okay? That is exactly the opposite of validation. That's saying, I don't really care what you're feeling. I'm looking at the problem, and it looks to me by your emotional arousal that you can't solve that problem on your own. So I have to jump in and help. I don't want to talk about those pesky feelings. I actually want them to go away so that we can solve this problem, right? That is exactly the opposite of what we need to do when our kid comes to us emotionally aroused. So what does validation look like? Validation is very quiet. Validation is peaceful and gentle. Validation says, it makes sense to me that you're angry right now. And if you can identify why it makes sense and not just give lip service to the emotion and say, I understand you're angry. You really want to go to that party. And I'm saying no. I totally get it. I get that you're angry. You're not even talking about the problem. You're simply talking about what the kid is feeling. When we are validated for what we are feeling or thinking, immediately our emotional arousal system calms down. Once your emotional arousal system calms down, then you can talk about the problem at hand, and you can do it peacefully and gently because both of you and your kid are not in an intense state of emotional arousal. Okay? That's the first thing we need to do. Just identify what the kid is feeling and validate that it makes sense. We can always validate what somebody is feeling. We cannot not always validate what a kid is thinking, or more importantly, what a kid is doing. That may not make sense, and you don't ever want to validate something that is not valid or doesn't make any sense or that you can't understand. But generally, if we can identify someone's emotion, that will make sense to us. Okay? So when co-regulation doesn't happen, what does that look like? Next slide. So same scenario, kid comes to you, high emotional arousal, looking for you to say, it makes sense to me that you're feeling that way. And the environment responds ineffectively not with validation. So sometimes that looks like problem solving, basically ignoring or dismissing the emotional response. I'm not going to talk about that. It's ridiculous. Another way that we can be ineffective, and all of this is inadvertent. I mean, this is happening like in nanoseconds, and it just becomes so habitual we don't even think about it, right? So we are not intending to be invalidating, but this is sometimes what happens. And a lot of times we're invalidating because we are not minding our own emotional arousal, okay? So if we're keeping ourselves in check, we're better able to be validating. So we can ignore and dismiss, say, I don't want to hear about that. We can punish, we can say, I go to your room, give me your phone. This is ridiculous that you're behaving this way. Get out of my sight. We could punish them and say, oh, you wanted to go to that party. Now you're not going to go to the party for the rest of your high school career, right? So punishing them because they're having an emotional response. Blaming that on a character flaw. What are you know, you are so overly sensitive about this. This is ridiculous. I can't believe, you know, what is wrong with you? Why do you have to react this way all the time? So what is the message that this is giving the kids? This is giving the kids the message that whatever they're feeling is bad and wrong and unpleasant, and I want it to stop right now. And, you know, you don't seem to be able to handle this situation in a way that's, you know, appropriate for your age. Totally the wrong message we want to give about somebody's emotional life, right? So what happens when we invalidate is actually the emotional arousal gets turned up, right? So you thought you had a problem when the kid walked into the room, you got a much bigger problem at this point, right? And they become more and more intensely aroused, and they will continue to up the ante until eventually they get something that validates. And usually that means when the parent capitulates. This is a very difficult and dangerous cycle to get into, because what happens is the kids don't learn how to regulate their own emotions. They don't trust their judgment. And they begin to believe that the only way they can get their needs met is through this dysregulation. Okay. I shouldn't feel this way. What I feel is bad. Nobody responds to me. My parents don't understand me. They sort of lose their compass in trusting that internal communication system that is our emotional system. And that can be very dangerous. Okay, next slide. So here's the nuts and bolts of making your family frame. And it's relatively simple, not necessarily easy, but basically you want to distinguish between rules and expectations. Family frames are based on rules, and rules are based on safety, and these are non-negotiable. Okay, so you can identify pretty easily what are safety concerns, and that those change as kids. You know, those are different for elementary, middle, and teen, but they are always based on safety. And again, can't stress this enough. These are non-negotiable, because if it's unsafe, it's unsafe. There's not any wiggle room in that. Breaking the rules results in consequences, okay? And the consequences should be commensurate with the crime. So we don't want to be taking our kids' phone away if they get caught drinking, right? Because the phone, we have to acknowledge the phone is their means of communication to the outside world. Many kids rely on it. Georgette, you and I work with kids that reach out to us throughout their day when they need coaching or they need help. If they didn't have their phone, it would make our jobs really difficult. And so taking away the phone is not always the answer, and it doesn't really match the going out and drinking crime or rule breaking. So you want to make sure that the consequences speak to the crime. So if the kids are being unsafe on the internet, you take away the internet. But if the kids are going out and being unsafe while socializing, you curb the socializing, okay? Expectations are different than rules. Expectations are things we want to see happen. If they don't happen, they don't result in a consequence. What happens is that meeting an expectation results in a reward. And the way we reward our kids is completely dependent on the individual kid. Some kids are motivated by money. Some kids are motivated by being able to go out and hang out with their friends. Some kids are motivated by the latest video game. Some kids are motivated by going to concerts. Whatever it is that your child is motivated by, that they will work to achieve, that's what you base your reward system on. So I'll give you a quick example of an expectation that I had in my house when my kids were living with me. They're grown and flown now for the most part, making their own rules and expectations in their families. but we had the expectation that once they were able to drive and they had a car at their disposal, that if they went to the dump once a week and brought the garbage to the dump, then they would get 1 tank full of gas, or the dollar amount in their bank account for 1 tank of gas. Now, if they didn't go to the dump that for a week, it was not a big deal. Sure, the garbage built up, but it was never so bad that, you know, we couldn't live with them not going to the dump. However, if they didn't go to the dump, they didn't get the money for the gas. Didn't mean they couldn't use the car. Didn't mean they couldn't buy gas on their own and use their own money. Just meant that I wasn't going to pay for it, right? So between the 2 kids over the course of their time, they only didn't go to the dump twice, because they were very motivated by getting that gas money. And it didn't, and I don't care when they went to the dump. If they went at 7 in the morning on their way to school, that's great. If they went on Saturday, you know, the minute before the dump closed, I don't care, right? The only expectation was that the garbage went to the dump by them, not me, once a week, and they would get the reward. So expectations are things we want to see happen. And we build the motivation for those things to happen by giving rewards. Okay, next slide. Yeah, this is a terrific book that was quoted a lot as we entered into the pandemic. And it was this idea of becoming anti-fragile. So the quote is, therefore, we should build up systems and ourselves to be anti-fragile. That is, to construct our lives and our society in such a way as to benefit from major unanticipated events. And I think this is really important for families. It should not be a surprise when our kids break the rules. It should not be a surprise when things don't go exactly the way we had projected when they come out of the womb and we're looking at them and we have their whole life plan and we know exactly how it's going to go and where they're going to go to college and what they're going to become and where they're going to live. We have no idea. So the idea that we build a system that is strong enough to withstand the unpredictability of life, we will be able to benefit from that. And that's what resilience is based on. It's based on being knocked down, failing, getting up, and forging a new path. Not just going back to the way we did things before, but how can we do it better, stronger, and wiser? Okay. There was a question that came up. I don't know if we want to talk about that now or wait until the end and do all questions. What do we think?
I think it was related to rules versus expectations. So maybe we can do that now. I think the question was, can you make a differentiation between expectations versus chores?
Expectations is the broad category. Chores is a subcategory of that. So if one of the expectations in your home is that everybody participates in some way in the maintenance of the home and keeping the home running, that would be an expectation. You want to make sure that expectations are such that if they do not get done, if they do not get met, that the house doesn't fall apart. And you have to think about, sometimes chores don't get done. Okay. Now, you want to get into a system where the kid recognizes that they're not able to get the chore done and will ask somebody else to do it for them and negotiate what they can do for that person. So again, building that collaboration, that communication. What you want to build is the opportunity for that kind of negotiation to happen. Because in expectations, negotiation is actually a good tool. It's a good way to learn how to ask for what you need, asking for help, which is a skill. So you want to make sure that your expectations are such that if they don't happen, the family doesn't fall apart, okay? You also want to make sure that chores and expectations are not something that you nag about. Okay? If you are nagging them constantly about something, that is going to be very unmotivating for the kid to do it, right? So we want to make sure that the expectations are clear, they're attainable, they're reasonable, they're able to be performed in a timely manner. That's another thing, that you want to give kids a time frame in which they can complete these tasks, and then leave it up to them to manage their time about when they do them, okay? So you should only be needing to be checking on the chores maybe once a day, but ideally just over the course of the week, and then the rewards will come usually at the end of the week. Does that answer that question? Okay. I'm sure there'll be more questions about that, so we can move on to the next slide.
So now we wanted to talk to you a little bit about how do you use this frame that you're creating for your family to talk about substance use, how to create a frame around substance use, because the reality is that substance use is a safety issue, right? And the way in which substances are used is a safety issue. Can you go on to the next slide, please? So how do you have this conversation with elementary age children? Now, again, I think there's often a hesitation that, you know, we don't want to introduce our kids too young to these concepts. What if my child had absolutely no clue what marijuana was, and like now I've planted the idea in their head and now they want to go out and explore? That doesn't happen, because I can guarantee you that if you are not talking to them, their only source of information are their friends and the internet. Maybe that, you know, a 12-year-old back in the 80s or 70s, or maybe not 70s, but the 80s, might not have been had as much exposure to substances as they are now. But now with social media and access to the internet, and how precocious I think kids can be these days because of all of the access to this information. If you're not the one having that conversation with them, it means that they're getting their information from much less reliable sources. Now, there's another reason why you want to have this conversation with elementary age children. And that's because according to SAMHSA, 3,300 children under 12 try marijuana each day. Each day, there's 3,300 children under the age of 12 trying marijuana. And that 5 in 10 children under 12 get prescription medication for non-medical purposes. That's half of the kids. So, you know, I think oftentimes we have this image of having to have this conversation where, you know, we call the family meeting and we all sit down and we're all very somber and, you know, serious about this. And you could do that. But you also, this isn't a conversation that's a one and done. And this is a conversation that's actually most effective if you can find natural opportunities to talk about substance use instead of having like this one and done, very formal, somber meeting, right? So for example, if you're watching a movie together and someone is, you know, lighting up I'm going to date myself. I was going to say a joint. I don't think anyone smokes joints anymore. But vaping, that might be the perfect opportunity to sort of turn around and say, like, what have you heard about vaping? What do you know, what are your friends saying about vaping? What have you read? If someone in a movie or you know, you notice that they're on social media and, you know, there's an article about a celebrity who, you know, got arrested for a DUI. What do you know, let's have a conversation about alcohol and, you know, some of the safety issues that come with driving and drinking. This is also around the time when children might start to notice what you have in your medicine cabinet. They might start to ask questions about it and why it's there. And again, I think our natural reaction is to probably slam the medicine cabinet closed and say, like, it's not for you. But instead, it's actually a perfect opportunity to say, well, this is what it is and what it's for. How come you're asking? How come you're curious? Or, have you heard about people, using prescription medications? Ask them what they've seen, what they've heard, and dispel any misconceptions. Because a lot of times they have very, very incorrect information about the risks of certain substances. You want to be explicit about the family norms. Again, if we think back to the survey that Darien students took, one of the biggest predictors was that they knew they had very explicit messages and rules from their family, and that it was that their parents disapproved of underage drinking. So you have to be explicit. Don't assume that because it hasn't been an issue that they know how you feel about it. You have to be explicit. And you also want to be aware of the messages that you send. So if you talk about, alcohol, sometimes people use alcohol because it makes them feel like they're a little less stressed at the end of the day, but that's really not the best way to deal with your stress. And then that night you come home and you say, oh my God, I've had such a day, I need a drink. That's a little bit of, do as I say, not as I do. Next slide. For preteens, you want to continue to, you're building on what you've already built in early elementary school, right? You continue to build on those conversations based on social media and movie portrayals. You also want to start to talk about why some people start to use substances, right? And the consequences. Again, the fact that they're exposed to as much as they are in terms of social media, and whatever celebrity got arrested for doing this or got caught with that, or again, that you can use it to your advantage to talk about what are the consequences, even for adults, for using in particular ways or in particular settings, and what they can do instead. Have a conversation with them, ask them what they could do instead. Because that's also a really great opportunity to start to assess what are your preteens' coping skills. What skills do they have to manage their emotions so that they don't have to turn to substances to help regulate those emotions, to numb those emotions? And if you find that, they can't come up with anything, journaling, drawing, anything that helps them feel more at peace, then that's something to work on, right? To build on. Also start to come up with a plan for what to say when they're offered their first drink or their first vape. Because it's coming. They will, at this age, be going to a party when there will be someone who will introduce them to it. Have them role play with you. Have them blame you. It's always easier for a teen to say, like, oh my God, no, like my parents would kill me and like ground me from now until the end of my lifetime. They're so strict, they're awful. I would much rather that as a parent and have them throw me under the bus, but that's their excuse, as opposed to them fearing that they're going to be called nerd or square or whatever it is, because they're refusing sort of their own volition. And continue to ask what they're hearing from friends and reinforce that family norm, right? Continue to be explicit. Don't assume that just because you had that conversation a couple of times as they were growing up, that they can't assume, or that they don't assume that maybe things have changed. Because that was the other thing that came up in the survey, is that at a time when they needed that norm, they started to report less disapproval from their parents in terms of underage drinking as they got older.
Next slide.
Yeah, so here's where the rubber really meets the road, because the teenagers, high school students, are exposed to substances on a daily basis. So you want to make sure that when they hit the high school, that this is not the first time that you're talking to your kids about what your rules are as a family and what your beliefs are about underage drinking. So the rules need to be set prior to the kid coming home having used. That is definitely not the time that you want to begin having the conversation about consequences. So this is a conversation that should be ongoing from the time that they're, middle school up until teenage years, that if you drink or use drugs, this is the consequence for that behavior. And it's very clear and it's enforceable. And make sure that they are reasonable consequences, okay? Because again, they need to be enforceable, and they need to be, it's that fine line between being too harsh and too lenient. If they're too lenient, the kid is going to do that risk-benefit analysis and always are on the side of taking the risk, which teens in many cases do anyway. So you want to make sure that it's harsh enough to give them a moment to pause, but not too harsh that they are going to feel completely trapped and will rebel and become much sneakier and unsafe in trying to get their needs met. Again, I think I mentioned this before, do not be surprised when your teens experiment with substances. This is typical and normative for teens. Our job as parents is to be prepared for that and to be able to deal with it in as effectively as possible. If despite the rules that and the consequences, the behavior seems to be continuing or amplifying, that would be the time that you would seek help. And we are blessed to live in communities in Darien and in Fairfield County that have so many resources available to us right in the school, pediatricians, Silver Hill Hospital, all sorts of therapists, counselors, and doctors. So lots of availability of resources. Ensure that your lines of communication are open and that your teen trusts you enough to call you if he, she, or they are in a situation, or a friend is in a situation where they need an adult to come and help them, okay? And this is where validation, looping back to that co-regulation, if you have established communication when there is a high emotional arousal, and if a kid is freaked out because he or his friend is blacked out, that is obviously a state of high emotional arousal. You might even have substances on top of that. If you have established a means of communication, a mode of communication where you are going to react to that in a regulated way and say, I understand how scared you are, and I'm really, really glad you called me. Now let's figure out what to do. Your teen is going to be able to call you in those situations, and that's what you want to happen. Okay. Again, as Georgette said, if they're not calling you, they're going to call somebody who is probably a peer who is not going to be necessarily the wisest, strongest person in that situation to handle it. Very, very important to model effective behavior around substance use. Drinking is part of our culture in the communities that we live in. It is quite normative to have alcohol involved in pretty much every social activity. It's unreasonable to think that if drinking or other drug use is part of the community that you and your family are not going to engage if you choose to. Using moderation, not using drugs and alcohol to regulate your emotions. not talking about it in such a way where it becomes a need, and you know, and basically just how you manage it in your own life is a really, really, really big indicator of how your teen is going to manage it. And I hear a lot in talking to parents that when we talk about substance use, they say that, you know, I'd rather my kids learn how to drink while they're home before they go to college and they're let loose. Kids don't learn how to drink. And the more kids binge drink as teens, the more they will binge drink in college. Actually, the research shows that the longer teens go without drinking, and certainly binge drinking, the better chance they have of living a sober or a moderate use life. So teaching your kids to drink responsibly is actually a fallacy. And we need to stand behind the facts, which are that it is underage drinking is illegal, and it is unsafe for teens. Any substance that you put in a developing brain is going to affect the developing brain. And we spend a lot of time in our communities fostering a very rigorous academic life for our kids. Why would we let them drink or drug that would affect their brain so that they couldn't achieve the academic success that we want for all of our kids? Right. And so if you feel that with your very solid family frame, they are still, you know, indulging in risky behavior, I would seek help, and I would err on the side of caution and not wait too long. You want to intervene early. Early intervention is always a wonderful thing.
So as we end this part of the workshop and then start to take questions, we wanted to draw your attention to a couple of resources. One is the Thriving Youth Task Force's substance use resource page, which, you know, again, you will have access to this PowerPoint. I believe it'll be sent out to everyone who registered, but it has all of the presentations that we've given so far, including the survey data, as well as a lot of vetted resources and websites for you to think about or learn more about how to talk to your kids about substances and how to seek help if needed. There's also Silver Hill Hospital, and the website is included there. There's the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut, although, you know, we are primarily focused on treating mental health disorders. If there's a co-occurring disorders, we would probably refer you to Silver Hill. And in terms of more general, you know, setting the frame and talking to your kids about these difficult topics, there's a couple of books that are really, really great. One is called No Drama Discipline by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. And then How to Talk to Kids. So How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Adele Faber and Elaine Maslish. And then if you are seeking treatment for your child or a loved one, you can always in Connecticut call 211 to get a list of resources in your area. You can also call the SAMHSA National Helpline, which is 1-800-662-HELP. And they will connect you to and give you referrals for different resources in your community. Okay. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and Emily will read them out.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy and Georgette. That was excellent. And we've got a few questions coming in. Just see if I can kind of combine a few of them. All right. So this is a question I'm sure you both have heard before. I hear from my teen that our family frame and rules are different from those of her close friends' families. This makes things very complicated for her. How should I address this?
Do you want to go ahead, Tracy?
Sure. Well, different is wonderful. That's fantastic. I would hope that there isn't a cookie cutter version of the family frame. You know, that is that's an important point that I don't think either of us mentioned, is that your family frame has to be a reflection of your own family values. What are the goals of your family? What's the mission statement for your family organization, right? So, you know, Tesla and, you know, a cookie store are two organizations that have mission statements, but they're going to be very different. Your family frame is a reflection of your own family values, so it should be different. No two family frames should be the same. Rules should be the same. Rules, because they're based on safety concerns, those should be fairly the same. That should be typical and normative. Consequences, again, it's based on your family. So how do you deal with that? I would talk about how the kid feels. How is it different? How does it feel to have ours be more lenient or more strict? Is there something about the family frame that you think is unreasonable? Let's talk about it. If it's a safety concern, non-negotiable. But maybe there's some other things that need to be looked at and changed as our family has grown, as situations have changed. So it's a statement like that is like music to my ears. That is such an opportunity for conversation and to hear about, you know, what are your friends telling you? What do you feel about our family frame? Why do you think we have this, right? So I would say that is just, certainly it's a therapist's gold mine when you hear statements like that, but looking at that as an opportunity to find out more. Tell me more. And the key is not to get defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So if we take those statements as an attack on us as a parent, what are you saying? Are you saying I'm a bad parent? Well, what does that mean? Well, you know, what, do you want to go live with that family? Would that be what you want? Right? If we take it personally as an attack, we've blown it. Rather, take that as an opportunity. That's a kid that's coming to you and saying, I want to talk about something. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's talk.
Yeah. Again, if you think about those conversations and then them pushing limits, it's their job. It is quite literally their job to push against those limits. And it is our job to be bigger, stronger, wiser, kind. The kind part is having that conversation and listening to them and validating them. The bigger, wiser, stronger is, I hear you. You know, as a teenager, I hated this as well. And yet this is a safety issue. So tell me how angry you are.
Right.
I can take it, but I'm not good. This is not negotiable.
Excellent. Thank you both. We have another question coming in that reads, what if the train has already left the station in terms of teen substance use? How would you suggest redrawing the boundaries around issues like that? For example, if those middle school frame maybe wasn't set and now we're in high school.
Georgette, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think about it the way that we've all had those moments as parents where like, it feels like it takes, you know, 15 years to try to get a good habit going. And then as soon as we allow something like that maybe is less than ideal, and suddenly just because we did it once, it's like, now that's part of the family frame. We've always done it this way. What do you mean? Like you're changing the rules now, right? That's how it feels. I think I would take it the way that you would redraw the frame for anything else, right? If you've you know, if you go home and you talk with your partner, or, you know, if you're a single parent, you're thinking to yourself, like, you know, this is something that I want to change about my family. Let's say I don't like that we have dinner in front of the TV. This isn't something that I want to do. And again, that's not a safety issue, but just to draw a parallel, that it doesn't have to be that hard to redraw a frame. You have that conversation, you explain to your kid why you want something to change. You acknowledge that this is different, right? That this is different maybe from the way that things have been done from the past, but that this is part of, you know, maybe you don't say this to your kid, but you say this to yourself. This is the bigger, stronger, wiser part, right? But now I'm wiser, right? This is something that I know is unsafe for my kid. What's the kid's job? Is to protest. That's okay, right? Don't expect that, like, if you get it just right. I often hear parents is like, well, how do I like finesse it? How do I like message this so that, you know, my kid doesn't protest? It's like, not happening. Because if you're direct enough and your kid got the message, they're gonna protest. That's okay, right? That's okay, that's their job. They should protest. It's your job to stand firm and sort of, like what Julia Child said, you know, when you're flipping the omelet, have the power of your convictions, or else you're gonna have a whole, you know, egg on your face. You gotta have the power of your convictions as to why you're setting this, so that when your child protests, you don't start to like, well, you know, maybe once a month, you know. And I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, you know, there's some powerful words that we can start this conversation with, and that's, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I blew it. It was a bad mom moment. And I'm really, really sorry. Because I didn't provide you with the boundaries, the limits, the structure to navigate this, and we're kind of navigating it together now, and I apologize. And this is what we need to do moving forward. So don't be afraid to apologize if you messed up. We mess up all the time. And again, modeling that I can mess up, I can acknowledge and take accountability for that, and I can still hold the frame, right? I'm not going to become so overcome with guilt and shame that I say, you do whatever you need to do. You can parent yourself. You're better at it than I am, right? None of that. We're modeling that regulation, that, look, I recognize I screwed up. I blew it. And we can get back on course. It's never, ever, ever, ever too late to start. You've got them home until they go away. You use every minute of that to model co-regulation and emotional intelligence. You for as long as you got them, it's never too late to start.
Thank you. This is another question I'm sure you both have answered before. I think a very important one. What if my spouse and I are on very different pages in terms of our family frame?
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, it's a good idea for you and your spouse to talk about the family frame before you roll it out to the rest of the family. I think it's you're going to have to work really, really, really hard to convince me that something that's unsafe should be allowed. I mean, I will entertain it. No one's been able to do it yet. I suppose there's somebody out there that could, but unsafe and illegal are unsafe and illegal. I mean, that's not really going to change. And, you know, a developing mind is a developing mind. That's not going to change. So on rules, I really think you have to stand firm and say, this is a non-negotiable. Expectations, that's where you have some leeway. And I think that both parents, both partners should have the opportunity to build that mission statement so that it reflects them. It shouldn't just reflect one parent. So that's where you have some room to be creative and expressive, is in the expectations. What's our family mission statement? But in terms of the rules and regulations, policies and procedures, those, I think you have to have a united front. Again, non-negotiable.
And we have another question coming in related to spouses. What if one spouse has a substance abuse problem?
Yeah, I actually was. I'm glad that whoever wrote that in, because I wanted to mention that if there is a history of substance abuse in your family, it's imperative that your kids know that and know that they have a genetic predisposition to substance use disorders themselves. I think that introducing them to Al-Anon, which is, or Alateen, which are groups for loved ones of alcoholics or people with substance use disorders. It's very important that they learn the language of recovery, sobriety, substance use, because it is a part of your family. Just like any other, if someone in your family had diabetes and you had to regulate the kind of food that you ate in your family, this is the same thing. This is a disease that is a family disease, and knowing how it's treated and what you can do to prevent it are just absolutely imperative. So thank you for asking that question. I don't know if that completely answered, because it does make things incredibly difficult. I would say seek your own support.
Yeah.
Georgette.
Yeah, I also had a thought about how to address it with your spouse. Because ultimately, yes, you need to address it with your child, but also talk with your spouse about, I think there's oftentimes things that, substance use is a disorder. Denial is a big part of it. Denial of how it impacts your loved ones is a big part of it. But being able to talk to your spouse about the impact that it's having on the family. Because there are times when, as parents, we seek treatment for things that we would have never sought treatment for our own sake. But we do it because we realize how it's impacting our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anything to get through that door, right? That treatment door. And to know that relapse is part of recovery, and to expect it, but to still hold, the family frame, even for spouses.
And I don't think it's unreasonable to set some appropriate consequences if a spouse is drinking, that might there be some consequences for the spouse if the family frame is such that they don't, that's not something that they want to happen in the house.
Thank you. Those are very helpful answers. And another question came through about how do we address if there's a substance use history in the family, but you've beautifully touched on that already. If anyone has, so we're at the end of our questions for now. If anyone has a final question, feel free to submit that. All right, I think we'll end this evening on that note. Thank you so much, Georgette and Tracy, for being with us. You provided just outstanding content. I have pages of notes over here. We have thank yous coming in through the chat, and just a few little housekeeping reminders as we close. Everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with this recording, the slides, all the materials from tonight. If anyone online is interested in attending our next Thriving Youth Task Force event, we have a documentary screening coming up on April 4th at 7 p.m. over Zoom of Chasing Childhood. And actually, Tracy Masella is one of the featured guest in that documentary, coincidentally. And we'll have a pre-screening of that documentary and then a panel discussion with Dr. Michael Hines and Genevieve Eason, who are also featured in the documentary. So we hope you'll join us for that and mark your calendars. And then lastly, this March, the Thriving Youth Task Force will be launching a social media campaign with critical information about marijuana and tips for talking with your teen. So if you're interested in tonight's event, we think you'll definitely want to be following the task force on Instagram and Facebook at Thriving Youth Darien. So thank you again so much for joining us tonight. We hope you took away a lot of valuable insights, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks again.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Georgette.
Thank you both.